I want to talk about how to get the cleanest possible vocal sound on your recordings. Clean vocals mean professional sounding vocals. And in today's world where a lot of people record at home, in second bedrooms, wherever they can, every little bit of improvement you can make to your vocal recording is going to be helpful. Very helpful. So I also want to just real quick let everybody know I have been doing live streams lately. I've done the second one about 2 days ago, and I'm looking forward to the next one, which may be tonight. But if you haven't caught it yet, I mixed a song from start to finish twice over 2 different live streams. They're long, they're marathons, but it's been fun. So I'm going to do more of those. I'm going to do some on mental health of musicians and artists and producers, creatives, people that go through the same stuff that I've been through, and I understand the pains of it. So I'm happy to talk about that stuff. And also stuff to do with tracking, recording, creating kind of these funky alternative style, beats, probably live. We'll do a bunch of different things. If you guys have other ideas, let me know. But back to this video. I had a comment from somebody who, wanted to share their opinion about vocal booths, and it sparked this idea for a video because I think this concept is misunderstood, and I want to share their comment with you guys. So this is it. It comes from Roman 2374. I believe vocal booths to be extremely misunderstood, they said. The point of a vocal booth is to isolate a vocalist from other instrumentalists playing at the same time. If you record vocals separately, you don't need a vocal booth. You need a pleasant room. Best vocals are recorded with good, not dead acoustics. Stop using vocal booths. Find a place that sounds pleasant. Might be your kitchen or garage. Might be a room in your basement. Okay, let's get into it. Now, I want to start by saying I don't agree with this thought process, and I'll tell you why. I've recorded in many different rooms. I used to live in an apartment that was, an untreated apartment I was renting, wood floors, sheetrock walls, very reflective. I had a couple mics at the time, so when I was recording in that room, and I recorded a couple vocalists, not just me in this one room, I could tell you it's always a problem when your recording has an inherent sound built into it that doesn't work with everything. When you have a room that might have, good acoustics, good is a weird definition. What is good acoustics? To some people, when I'm mixing, I like a dead room. Some people want their room to be a little reflective when they're mixing, whereas I think we could all agree a live room should sound pretty lively. So when it comes to what good acoustics means, for me, a mix room, it should be dead. For me, a vocal booth, it should be dead. There's not this sweet spot of a little bit of reverb is better than dead. But I think the part that I do agree with is the fact that you don't need a really, really dead room to get a vocal sound that is workable, that is okay, that might sound great on a recording. You don't need a completely dead room. The part here that's it's a big difference to me is that if you have a room that has any sort of sound that's always on that mic, you cannot now just get rid of it. You can't add a plugin like D-Reverb or, I like some of the Universal Audio C-Suite stuff. You can't just add that and get rid of all the room in there without also losing other things. Everything we do, there's a little bit of a compromise. So the ideal situation is have a vocal that's not recorded with anything on it that you now have to get rid of because your vocal will sound better the less processing you do to it. Therefore, you got a little bit of a verb sound on a vocal that might work in a few songs. And that's where this person's, mindset probably is when they're saying, a room has good acoustics is all you need. You don't need a dead room. Well, I don't agree with this because what if you want a dead vocal sound? The sound of a good room with good acoustics means inherently that it's not dead. There's some life in it. So some song you're working on where you want that vocal to be right up in your face with totally dry, no reflections. How are you going to get that without processing it and losing stuff in the process of processing it. You're losing top end, you're losing a little bit of high mids. Why would you want that as, instead of creating an environment that's completely dead? Now, when it comes to, if you're in an apartment like I was, like I didn't have the option of hanging a bunch of stuff on all the walls, and I didn't want to do that. So as a result, I did the best I could. Now, how to get the best you could, how to get the best you can out of a room? Go to the middle of the room, away from the walls. That's the first thing. If you're near walls, you need to cover them. You can cover them with either diffusion to scatter the sound or absorption to absorb the reflections. When it comes to a vocal, if you have a lot of reflections, it's a huge negative. Your vocal is always going to sound like it's not as direct, not as in your face. You're hearing reflections off the walls also being captured by the capsule at different time as your vocal, and it does the same thing as a bunch of out-of-phase mics would have, that kind of an effect on drums or anything where you have mics that are not in phase. Multi-mics on one source, not in phase, is going to make the sound weaker, less strong, less directional, less in your face. And as a result, your vocal now not as strong, not as in your face. Certain points will sound weak. That's what happens. So understanding the polar patterns of mics is going to help you, because your best bet is to use a mic that will work in this room. And we all know that mics that are condensers are more prone to sensitivity, which means every little nuance in your vocal, it's going to capture. It's also going to capture every flaw in the room. Or now here's where the real big rub compared to what this person said comes into play. It's not about isolating from a band. Like, that's one huge important use for a vocal booth. If you have a whole band playing, put a vocalist in a booth, now everybody can play and the vocalist is still isolated. Yes, that's a given. But what about if you've got sounds in the room, like maybe your heater makes noise? In the apartment that I was in, sounded like somebody was taking a hockey stick to the pipes every time the heat was running. So a vocal booth would isolate from that. What if you've got neighbors making noise, doors opening and closing? A vocal booth would isolate from that. This has nothing to do with the band. What if you got dogs barking? You've got an AC in the room blasting that sounds like a jet engine. Kids in the next room, whatever. You got 100 reasons I could come up with in which an isolated space would be better than a room that has noises bleeding into it. So let's assume that everybody understands that, and at the same time, you only have one choice of room. What do? You take a mic that's ideally cardioid. And a cardioid mic, let me show you what that looks like, because I got that pulled up right here. These are your polar patterns. You have to start understanding this stuff, and it's easy to do because there's not a whole bunch of choices, right? Cardioid is this one. Now, the shape here, everything that's in this color, not this part outside of it that's black, this part right here is what the mic picks up. So this assumes that, like, let's say the handle of your 58 is this, and this is the head of the 58. This is what it's going to capture, which is why cardioid is usually a go-to for just picking up the sound in front of it. It's going to reject the sides, and it's going to reject the back. It's still going to get some, but it's a lot more focused in the front and a lot more rejection in the back and the sides. So cardioid is a good move. Now, when I think of like Tiny Desk, they use shotgun mics almost on everybody. And the reason is it's a much narrower focus on the front. So it's really only going to get what's directly in front of it. And it does also, if you notice, get a little bit of each side and a little bit of the back, which in a case like Tiny Desk, where there's other vocalists singing, and even though the room has got, it's got books all behind it and everything, books are great for diffusion. They scatter very well. They're not so great for absorption, but they do absorb a little bit. But they're really good for scattering because they're all different sizes and they're all different widths. And so they're really good to scatter frequencies, which is a benefit. Because when the frequency just goes back and then it hits a flat surface, it cancels itself out. So there's a benefit to the scatter factor. So the books behind them is great, but also, you get to hear a little bit of what's actually going on in the room because the mic picks up some stuff on the sides and some behind it. So you actually do get a little more presence of the room, but those sessions are extremely dead. They sound so dead, all the Tiny Desk recordings. And I happen to like them, but they're very dead sounding. So a shotgun mic is creating that. But what I want you to see is, like, if you have a mic that's a condenser and you have the choice for the Omni, that's going to get everything all around it, which is good if you've got 3 or 4 singers around a mic and you're doing harmonies, kind of trying to do like an a cappella thing, or kitchen sink singing, as like Daniel Lanois, Lanois used to do, right? Everybody around a mic doing their thing. Omni is a nice call for that because everybody is now going to be captured equally, instead of, the people behind the mic barely heard and people in front of the mic super heard. Now, bidirectional right here, you notice it's shaped like an 8. What do you think that is? Figure 8. That's your ribbon mics. And this is, a very helpful tool to reject the sides. So especially on drums, when I'm using a figure 8 mic like this on drums, I will often put the side that rejects the drums facing the drums so that I can capture the wall reflection and it makes the room feel bigger. You'll get the drums bouncing off the wall, which is what you want to give it more of a room sound. So I'm actually miking the room by miking the walls and not miking the drum kit. So the position of the mic, and when I say not miking the kit, I mean I'm using the side that's rejecting facing the kit. So either side, because it does the same thing on both sides and it captures the front and the back. So there's, several ways to look at what we're doing here, but supercardioid, which is, it's another kind, it gives you kind of this, but notice the sides are different, but it also gives you this bulb in the back. Now, when it comes to a vocalist, this bulb in the back is probably a negative. Not always. It could work depending on your room, but if you have any reflections where the singer's voice bounces off a wall and then comes back, you will have some signals showing up through the back of the mic, which doesn't always sound as pleasant as if it rejected all that stuff in the back, like on a cardioid. So plenty of stuff to think about, but what I would focus on is this. If you're thinking about how to get away with doing vocals in a room that the walls are all hard surfaces and, this is all you got to work with, most likely you want to get away with a cardioid mic. And if you don't have one, it's literally $100 to buy a Shure SM58. So that's within most people's budgets who are trying to get something recorded well. And believe me when I tell you, don't go with one of these hyped versions of a 58. Just go with a standard Shure 58 that's dark. It's a little bit, because you'll be able to do what you need with EQ later and it won't sound obnoxious. A lot of these cheap mics that are like 58 knockoffs, they make you think they sound better because they have this huge bump in the high end. And a lot of times it's just nasty. And then you wind up having a way worse sound than if you would just use a standard Shure SM58 that might not just sound as pleasant to you out the gate, but it will handle EQ better. It'll handle treatment better. You'll be able to compress it and EQ it and make a better sound result instead of one of these cheap mics that's like $50 or $60 and is a cardioid, fake Shure SM58, essentially. Now, moving on from this, let's go back to that part of that person's comment that says, where is that? I want to pull that up again real quick. This thing right here. So the part of this that I really don't agree with might be your kitchen or garage. Okay. How many kitchens do you know that have carpeted cabinets? We're thinking kitchens, right? Countertops, metal sink, cabinets, a floor that won't hold spills, a floor that you can wipe spills up. So we're talking hard floor, table that's hard. How many tables that are carpeted? How many cabinets that are carpeted or have some soft surface? How many countertops You know that there's soft surface. I've yet to hear a kitchen that sounds great in terms of acoustics. Now, it's going to be reflective. So if you're going for that sound where like you go in a shower to record because you have reverb and you like that sound and you don't need a plugin, it's great for that sound. But if you were to record everything there in your whole career, I bet you there's some stuff that you want a dead sound for. So this doesn't work. The best thing you could do is use a dead place, because then the deader it is, the more you'll be able to do whatever you want later. You could always add stuff like reverb or delay or anything that short, little bit of 30, 40, 50, 60 millisecond delays, just something to give it a little something. And that you could argue that, oh, that's what the kitchen gives or whatever. But the difference is you have all the control in the world over it if you do it from a dead recording. Whereas you always have a built-in sound you can never get rid of, like a fingerprint that's on every recording you have, if you do all your recordings in a kitchen that has some sort of reverb sound in it. Same with a garage. How many garages we know are carpeted? How many garages we know don't have a door that's metal for a car to drive into? Like, how is this going to be good? So a lot of this, some of this comment, it's like, I understand the point, and the rest of it's like, your best bet is never going to be a place, unless these are very strange, kitchens and garages that are going to have good sounding acoustics. You don't want to box yourself in. And what I was saying about when I recorded in that apartment that had reflective walls, wood floors, reflective ceiling, the recordings all had a sound imprinted on them. I made it work as best I could. The recordings are usable, but they worked better when I used an SM7 because it had a lot more rejection. So it's only going to get what's in front of it for the most part. That's why that mic works so well in multiple rooms. And the guys like Daniel Lanois, who use rooms generally that's like one big open space to do everything. They have a control room, a live room, it's all in the same place. And the people that record their vocal, it's all done usually in the same room. They got a lot of mics. Nobody who uses spaces like that doesn't have a mic locker where they can choose what they want for each circumstance. Like Bono, U2, used an SM58 because that works really well for his voice right in the control room, even with the monitors blasting, because the mic is held up where the rejection point is where the monitors are playing music. So the back of that cardioid is getting the monitors, and it's getting mostly the front, and all the rejection is fine. All right. When you're thinking about vocals, right? Pro voiceovers, most of them are done in really well-treated rooms, not rooms with good acoustics. They're done in very dead rooms that have hardly any decay, so that they can add whatever they want later. It's not like there's a room that sounds perfect with decay and good acoustics and yet is also usable on every single voiceover recording. So no matter how you look at this, you want flexibility. And if you're thinking about people who do only voiceovers, you need a very dead room. You need to be able to give that option. So everyone doesn't need to buy a vocal booth, especially everyone doesn't need to buy a subpar vocal booth. You can buy cheap vocal booths that are basically very thin layer of foam over, something very reflective. And that's the vocal booth that they're calling it or whatever. And you can buy them from a lot of places. Those are almost worthless, if you ask me. It needs to have enough foam layers, at least, to be able to take down a vocal. And a vocal has much lower SPL than like a guitar or a bass or a kick drum, but yet you still need enough of that foam to be able to take it down. A little thin layer of it's not going to do a whole lot if the vocalist is powerful. Now, here's where all the nuance comes in. Do you sing quietly? Are you somebody who's very quiet on the mic? You practically whisper? Or do you belt? If you belt and you have some low register to your voice, you need more treatment than somebody who doesn't. Also, are you using effects? It surprises me almost how many people don't realize that when you turn up the effects on, like if you turn compression up, you are going to bring up the room with it. That's part of it. So you may say, why do I hear so much of the room in my vocal? If you have a compressor on it at all, it's going to give you more of the room. But what I tell you is this: use that to your advantage. In other words, hear what your room sounds like, because that will tell you whether you're in the ballpark of it's going to be a workable vocal or not. Record something, then hit it with a compressor. When I say record something, I mean you could record your voice, but also do a section, like at least a minute or 2 minutes or longer, where you have no vocal on it at all, and hit it with a bunch of compression. It'll bring up the room a lot. You'll hear all of what's going on. That's where you'll hear, can you hear your AC running? If so, turn it off. You're going to hear it on the recording. Whatever you hear when you do that, that's what you're going to hear when you try to bring the nuances of the vocal out and you try to hear all the personality in it. You're going to hear all the flaws and whatever's going on there. If you hear the dogs barking, the birds chirping, anything, you hear reflections off the wall next to you, you're going to notice it. So that's a good way to tell what's really there, And another thing is, a lot of people treat the floor and they don't think about the ceiling. If you have low ceilings and the floor has carpet on it and is probably not the problem, for example, let's say you got heavy duty thick carpet and you put rugs under you, so you're really doing the floor up, but you still hear reflections, and you're in the middle of your room, which is a good move. Don't be near corners. Don't be in a closet or something where your voice essentially banks off all these hard reflective surfaces and is going to find its way into the capsule of that mic. It's going to bank off enough things to get there eventually. So if let's say, assume you're doing everything right. In other words, not near any walls. So you're in the middle of a room. You've got, on the walls that exist, scattered treatment in random positions. In other words, like nothing flat. So if you have a flat wall, you put up stuff that makes it scatter. That's where bookshelves are nice, filled with books. Like a wall of a bookshelf is nice, especially if they're random sizes and random thicknesses of books. You got clothes, you spread them out everywhere in that room. The heavy, thick clothes, t-shirt ain't gonna do nothing. You got, mattress, so you put it behind you. You got couch cushions, so you stack them in front of whatever's reflective. If you just do this in a few clutch places, considering where you have to be positioned in that room, this will make a big difference. You don't necessarily have to put blankets over your head and stuff, but, I know people who have set up, moving blankets hung over, a ladder and another mic stand that they weren't using. And so they're essentially creating a non-reflective area within a space. And the more creative you can be, the better. Focus on what's behind the mic. When I say that, I actually mean you're facing the mic. So focus on the capsule is in front of you. Where's the mic facing? This way. Okay, so if I'm sitting here, I'm talking into this mic, the mic, what's going to happen is I'm not as concerned about what's in front of me. That's why those things that have like a booth in front of your face, I don't get them. They should be behind you. Because if you're singing into a place where you're far enough from that wall, what you're really worried about is the sound hitting that wall and then coming back and hitting the one behind you and then coming forward. When you speak or any kind of sound, it goes in all directions. People can hear me here, not only here, but here and here. So it's going everywhere. So it's going to bank off and come back at the mic. So the most important areas are like here and behind you, specifically important behind you, and then this way. Most important areas to put the treatment. So once you've got all this stuff going, the type of mic is everything, right? So if you have a mic that you can keep your preamp a little bit lower so it doesn't pick up a ton of the room also. In other words, if you're jamming your preamp, it's just like turning a compressor way up. You're going to really hear the room. So it's a balancing act between having it not too low where you then have to crank it up later and you're pulling up all this noise. And it's that balancing act, signal to noise ratio, the right amount where it's not so loud that we've now brought up the room like crazy. Avoid compression if you have a bad room. Let that happen during the mix if you can help it. Or if you're going to use it and you know what you're doing, go a little light on it, right? But that's the point. The more you compress, the more you bring up the room. So and use a mic if you can help it. Invest in a 58 if you don't own one, and compare that against whatever you're using. A lot of guys like that Audio Technica one that's so popular, and it's a condenser, so it's going to pick up more. And the goal here is to pick up less. So you want something like, why does Tom York really like the RE20? Because it's a dynamic mic that has it has a lot of low end, but it's also very directional. So just when you think about this, the mics that are used on podcasts in rooms that are treated but not recording studios, there's some kind of acoustic treatment going on if the people who do them know what they're doing, but they're mainly just picking up directional what's right in front of it because they're the right mic, dynamic mics. Most people on those podcasts are not using, U87s, U47s. Like they're not using those. They're certainly not using, anything that's going to pick up every nuance, because the guy moves his drink on the table, you'd hear it so loud. He moves the pencil slaps down, you'll hear it so loud. Every time they touch the table, you'd hear it. And that's not the goal. So you may think you love your mic, but you may need a different mic. So the room itself, if you took that out of the equation, you'd have a dead room. And that's why it's a benefit, because then all you're doing is worrying about the vocalist and the character that the mic and the vocalist, bring to the table when they combine. Because that's the thing. Every vocalist sounds different on every mic. So you have a couple choices. You have a way better shot of picking the one that will work for that given vocalist. And a lot of this, if the vocalist does a lot of different things, if they sing sometimes, they rap some other times, you may need to change the mic. One thing could be great and the other one won't, because it's like having two different vocalists at that point. You get what I'm saying? There's a lot to this. And if you want to go deeper, I'm happy to talk more about this on a live episode. I'll probably go live later tonight. It's either later tonight or tomorrow, one or the other. But I'm feeling the bug because I love it. So I'm about to do something on one of those streams, either tonight or tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. Turn notifications on so you can find it when it happens. I usually very short notice with them because it's like when I'm feeling it. So as soon as I commit to it, you'll see a notification pop up. And, if you have other questions about this stuff, I'm happy to diagnose it in lessons. I give our private lessons, and we could do vocal, discussions. You could give me sorry, I banged into this. You give me a sample of your vocal, and I'll tell you if it's usable or what I would do to treat it, the inherent problem that's happening, maybe give you some suggestions or how to change what you're doing. You could send me photos of your room, and we could figure it out. There's so many ways I would dive into this. But another big thing that people do is, people have hired me to mix songs, and when I listen to the vocal performance, if it's usable, I'll tell you it's usable, but I can clearly hear there's some verb on your vocal, which is what often happens when people record in a place they think is well treated, but they haven't thought it all through, and they're early in their artist career or around there where they're doing the best they can with what they got, and in that case, it might be a question of, I could use this vocal if you want, but if you do this, this, and this based on your situation, try these things, and then send me, a version if you want to potentially do it again, and we'll see which works better, and I'll use the one that works better. So there's so many different ways we could diagnose this, but these are case-by-case basis problems. Everybody's voice sounds different. Everyone's room is different. And if you invest in creating a space that's dead, it will not only be helpful for you during vocals, you could use it for almost everything. Recording guitars, like anything with a mic and a mic in front of it can work very well in a dead vocal booth. Because a space that's, has reflections is easy. They're everywhere, because that's what a room is before you thought about treatment. But it's far from the answer, because it's always going to have a sound. And that might not be good on every recording you're doing. It could be good on 1, 2, or 10, but it's not going to be good on all of them. And that's the problem. And when it comes to mixing, everybody likes something different when it comes to mixing. I always mix a little bit of some kind of verb flavor on my vocals. Even if it's a dry part, it's subtle. And it's usually like a quick, short delay. And it will thicken the vocal up. But the beauty is, it's not there the whole time. When I want the vocal to sound super present in your face, I remove it. Well, guess what you can't do if you've got that on your vocal all the time because you have a room with good acoustics, which means a little bit of a decay. You can't take it off. So great, perfect, not really. You get what I'm saying? It's a choice that you want to be able to make and control, not one that's always there. So, invest in some room treatment. It will go a long way. And believe me, if you can, go with movable things. Like I'm talking panels, you could either stand up and move around or gobos. Like I built my own gobos years ago, and there's nothing more valuable than gobos because moving them around, you can create a vocal booth or get rid of them and now that's gone. Make it as tight as you want or not. Within this room, which is super dead, when I tighten up panels, I've created a vocal booth out of the gobos. And then I bring them back to this position when I'm mixing, which is a combination of real absorption, a lot of absorption, and diffusion. But I like a very dead room when I mix. So it works very well to do vocals in this room also because I'm way, way, way more in favor of a room that has less reflections when I'm mixing. Some people do the opposite. That's personal taste. Some people like a room that sounds more boxy or more real, like a real living room or something. For me, it just gets in the way of me hearing what I need to hear. So everybody works different in that regard. I know like Andrew Sheps's room is notoriously not very treated. And, but he also uses headphones a lot too, his 7506s. So, and he also uses really bright speakers. And I don't like bright speakers. I don't like those headphones. And I don't like a room that has no treatment for mixing. So everybody's different, right? And that's just one example. Anyway, questions, comments, throw it in there. Catch me on that live stream. Don't forget to turn notifications on. And I look forward to seeing you guys there. I'm going to try to get it done tonight. So look for that if you're around. Evan Jaffe Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.